The engine on my truck had been knocking since Tulsa. I noticed it somewhere around mile marker 214, that low, rhythmic complaint from under the hood that old machines make when they've been pushed past what's reasonable. I turned down the radio and listened to it for a while, the way you listen to a person who's trying to tell you something important without quite finding the words. Then I turned the radio back up and kept driving. I had another 4 hours to go, and I wasn't stopping. Tell me something. Has anyone ever worked their whole life to give someone everything, only to find out that everything they gave was never enough? Leave a comment below. I read every single one. My name doesn't matter much to this story. What matters is that I am 67 years old. I have 2 replaced knees that ache when the weather changes, and I was driving 11 hours from Amarillo to Nashville on the day before Thanksgiving because my son had called me 3 weeks earlier and said, "Pa, it would mean the world to us if you came this year." His voice had that warmth in it I remembered from when he was young, before the money and the title and the house in the Belmead neighborhood changed the temperature of things between us. I had held on to that warmth the way you hold on to something fragile, carefully, with both hands. I want to be honest with you about what I look like when I pull into a driveway like my son's. I am not an impressive sight. I wear the same style of flannel shirt I've worn since I was 40. My boots are resoled 3 times over. My truck is a 2003 F-150 with a crack in the dashboard and a passenger side window that only goes halfway down. When I climbed out of it in front of that colonial house with the gas lanterns and the circular driveway and the professionally landscaped hedges, I probably looked like a man who had come to read the meter. I was not there to read the meter. What I have never once told my son, not in 38 years. Not when I paid cash for his college, not when I co-signed the loan on his first restaurant, not when I quietly retired the second mortgage on his house after the first business went sideways, is the full picture of what I have. I am not a wealthy man in any way that announces itself. I drive a truck with a knocking engine and I eat breakfast at a diner where they know my order. But over 40 years of commercial real estate, of buying properties that nobody wanted in towns that people were leaving, and holding them, and waiting, and holding them some more, I had built something that would surprise most people who knew me. It would have surprised my son very much. I had reasons for keeping it quiet, reasons that I believed in, reasons that had served me well. That morning, pulling into his driveway with my knee throbbing and 11 hours of road behind me, those reasons were about to be tested in a way I had not anticipated. I sat in the truck for a moment before going in, not because I was tired, though I was. I sat there because I had learned, sometime in my 60s, to give myself a moment before walking into a place, to take a breath, to notice things. The house was lit up warmly from the inside. Through the front window I could see movement, the shape of people, the flicker of the television. There were 2 other cars in the driveway besides mine, my son's Escalade and a smaller sedan I didn't recognize. I thought it might belong to my daughter-in-law's brother, who I had met once at the wedding and had not seen since. I grabbed my bag from the back seat, felt my left knee sing out as I stepped down from the cab and walked up the front path. The front door was unlocked. That was normal. They knew I was coming. I had texted my son from a rest stop outside Memphis to say I was 2 hours out. I turned the handle and pushed the door open, and the smell of the house hit me, first roasted turkey and something herbed, candle wax, the particular warmth of a house that's been full of cooking all day. And then I heard their voices. They were in the kitchen, which was around the corner and down a short hallway from the front door. They couldn't see me. They didn't know I was there. I stood in the entryway with my bag in my hand and I heard my son's voice, low and certain, the voice he uses when he's made a decision and is explaining it to someone. I had heard that voice across a table when he told his first wife he wanted a divorce. I had heard it when he told me he was leaving Amarillo for good. It was the voice of a man who has already finished thinking and is now simply announcing, "The place in Franklin is the best option," he was saying. "It's a step-down facility, but they have independent living on the campus too. He could start there and we'd still have flexibility." A step-down facility. I knew what that meant. I had toured one with my own father, 30 years ago, in a different city, in a different life. My daughter-in-law's voice came next. She has a precise way of speaking, each word placed deliberately, like someone setting dishes on a table. The timing needs to be after the estate planning is finalized. You understand that. If we move too fast and he gets wind of it, he could change everything. The attorney said the power of attorney process takes time, but it's cleaner than a conservatorship. I did not move. My bag was still in my hand. My knee was still hurting. Outside, a car passed on the street, its headlights briefly shifting the light through the narrow window beside the door. Neither of them heard me come in. He's not incompetent, my son said. The attorney is going to push back on that. He drove 11 hours alone at 67 with bad knees, she said. We document that. We document the truck, the condition of it. We build the picture slowly. I'm not saying we lie. I'm saying we frame. She was going to frame a picture of me as a man who couldn't manage his own affairs. A man who needed someone else to hold the reins. And my son, who I had driven 11 hours to see, who had said it would mean the world, was sitting at that kitchen island, nodding along, because he had married a woman who had looked at his father and seen an asset that wasn't yet in the right column of a spreadsheet. I stood there for a long moment. I am not a man who cries easily. I have buried a wife, buried a business partner, sat with my father in his last hours in a room not unlike the one they were describing for me. I did not cry standing in that hallway. What I felt was something quieter than grief and more durable. It was clarity. It was the particular focus that comes when the thing you feared turns out to be true and you realize that the fear is no longer necessary because the knowing has replaced it. I set my bag down very quietly on the floor. I took out my phone. I pressed record. I want to tell you something about the moments before you walk into a room to face something like this. There is a choice that presents itself. You can walk in angry, and the anger will serve you in the moment but cost you afterward. Or you can walk in with patience, not the patience of a man who is swallowing something, but the patience of a man who understands that the right moment has not arrived yet. I had built 40 years of value by understanding the difference between those two kinds of patience. I put my phone in my breast pocket with the microphone facing out, and I walked into the entryway, loudly this time, the way a man walks when he wants to be heard coming. "Hello?" I called out. There was a half-second of silence in the kitchen. Then a scramble of sound, chairs shifting, the refrigerator door that had been open being closed. By the time I rounded the corner into the kitchen, my son was standing near the island with a dish towel in his hands, and my daughter-in-law was at the stove, her back to me, stirring something that did not need stirring. "Pa!" My son spread his arms. His smile was the right size and arrived at the right speed. He had always been good at that. "You made it. How was the drive?" "Long," I said. "Good to be here." My daughter-in-law turned from the stove and gave me the smile she reserves for me, which is warm enough to pass but has never reached her eyes in all the years I have known her. "We're so glad you came," she said. "Dinner is almost ready. Let me show you to your room so you can get settled." "I know the way," I told her. "You two finish what you were doing." I carried my bag up the stairs to the guest room, which is decorated in a neutral palette that communicates that guests are tolerated here but not expected to stay long. I sat on the edge of the bed and stopped the recording on my phone and sent the file to my email. Then I called my attorney in Amarillo, a man named Gerald who has handled my affairs for 22 years, and who I trust more than most people in my life. It was 6:15 in the evening. He answered on the third ring because that is the kind of attorney Gerald is. I told him what I had heard. I told him what I needed. He asked me 2 questions, gave me 1 instruction, and told me he would have everything in place within 48 hours. I thanked him and hung up. Then I washed my face, changed my shirt, and went back downstairs for Thanksgiving dinner. Here is something I want you to understand about the dinner. It was, on the surface, a good dinner. The turkey was excellent. My daughter-in-law is a gifted cook, whatever else I might say about her. Her brother was there with his wife, a quiet woman from somewhere in Ohio who seemed genuinely kind and who kept refilling my water glass without being asked. There were candles on the table and the good china. My son made a toast about family and what it means to have people who show up. He looked at me when he said the word show up, and I held his gaze and I thought about what it must cost a person to mean both things at the same time, to love someone and to be arranging their diminishment. I decided that maybe he hadn't gotten there yet, that she was further along in the plan than he was, that perhaps there was still something in him that understood what he was losing. I decided to give him a chance he had not earned, but that I was going to offer anyway, because that is the kind of man I have tried to be. The next morning, I was up before everyone. I made coffee in their kitchen and stood at the window and watched the backyard fill with the gray light of a Tennessee November. There were 2 bird feeders back there that were empty. Small thing to notice, but I noticed it. People who keep bird feeders let them go empty when they stop paying attention to the things that don't pay them back. My son came downstairs around 8. He was in the clothes he sleeps in, and he looked younger without the professional packaging, younger and less certain, more like the boy I had raised. He poured himself coffee and stood beside me at the window for a moment. "Good drive?" he asked again. He'd already asked me this. "You asked me that last night," I said. He looked into his coffee. "Right, yeah." "Sit down," I said. "I want to show you something." We sat at the kitchen table. I pulled out my phone, and I played him enough of the recording that there was no room for misunderstanding. I played him the part about the step-down facility. I played him the part about the power of attorney. I played him the part where his wife said, "We build the picture slowly." Then I set the phone face down on the table, and I looked at my son's face. What I saw there was not the face of a mastermind. What I saw was a man who had been slowly guided down a path by someone smarter and more deliberate than him, who had reached a point on that path where the way back looked longer than the way forward, and who had not yet made peace with any of it. His jaw was tight. His eyes were moving across the table like he was reading something written on the wood grain. "Pa," he said, and his voice cracked on the one syllable. "I'm not angry," I told him. And it was true. What I felt was sadder than anger. But I need you to understand what I heard, and I need you to understand that I have already spoken to Gerald. As of this morning, a number of things have changed. Gerald is drawing up documents. The properties are moving into a trust structure that doesn't require a power of attorney. There is also a letter that will go to your wife's attorney by Monday morning, explaining what I have recorded and what Gerald can do with it if any attempt is made to pursue a competency proceeding against me. My son put his face in his hands. "Look at me," I said. He looked up. "I drove 11 hours to be here," I said. "Because you asked me to come. Because you said it would mean the world. I want to believe that was true. Part of me still believes that's true, somewhere under whatever she's talked you into. But I need you to make a choice right now, today, in this kitchen. Not tomorrow. Today. What kind of choice? Whether you are my son," I said, "or whether you are her partner in this, because I will love you either way. But only one of those versions of you gets to be part of my life going forward. And only one of those versions of you is ever going to look in the mirror at 70 and be able to stand what looks back." He was quiet for a long time. In the backyard, a cardinal landed on one of the empty feeders, looked around, and flew away. "She's been talking about this for 2 years, he finally said. "I kept telling her to drop it, but she's very good at making things sound reasonable." "I know," I said. "Reasonable is the most dangerous thing there is." I heard my daughter-in-law's footsteps on the stairs then. We both heard them. My son looked at me, and I gave him one slow nod. The way you give a man a nod when you're about to walk into something together and there's no more time for talking. She came into the kitchen dressed and polished, her hair done, her expression easy and pleasant. She looked at my son's face first, the way a person checks a room before entering it all the way, and something shifted in her expression very briefly, so briefly that I think only someone who was watching for it would have caught it. "Good morning," she said, and made for the coffee. "Sit down," my son said. She turned around with the coffee mug and looked at him. "What?" I said, "Sit down." She sat. She looked at me and then at my son, and she placed her hands flat on the table in a way that I recognized as composure being assembled very quickly. My son played her the recording. She listened to her own voice with no expression on her face. When it was over, she set the mug down carefully and said, "That was a private conversation. You were planning to have me declared incompetent," I said, "and to use that to assume control of my estate. I'd like to hear your thought about what qualifies as private." "You don't understand the context," she said. "We were worried about you, the drive, the truck. The attorney said the power of attorney process takes time, but it's cleaner than a conservatorship," I quoted back to her. Precisely. In her own cadence. "That was your context." Her composure held for another 3 seconds. Then something behind her eyes made a decision. She turned to my son. This is family business, she said. He doesn't need to. He's the family, my son said. His voice was quiet and very flat, and it was the most unambiguous thing I had heard him say in years. What happened after that was not dramatic in the way things are dramatic in movies. There was no shouting. There were no broken dishes. Gerald's documents arrived by email just before noon, and I printed them at the library 2 miles away because I did not want to use their printer. By early afternoon, my daughter-in-law had called her own attorney, and by evening she had moved herself to her sister's house in Brentwood, taking 2 suitcases and the good set of luggage that had been a wedding gift. My son and I ate leftover turkey at the kitchen table that night without ceremony. The house was very quiet. The empty bird feeders were still empty in the backyard. "I'm sorry, Pa," he said. "I know. I should have stopped it sooner." "Yes," I said. "You should have. I wasn't going to make it easier for him than that. Some things deserve to sit with a person for a while." "What happens now?" he asked. I put down my fork and looked at my son. This man who had been a boy in my house, who had learned to drive in the truck I still drove, who had his mother's eyes and her way of tilting his head when he was thinking hard about something. 67 years old, and I could still see him at 7, at 14, at 23, the day he left for Nashville, with everything he owned in the back of a rented van, and the absolute certainty of young men that they are driving towards something rather than away. "What happens now," I said, "is that you figure out who you want to be. The documents are handled. Gerald has it locked up. Nobody is getting anything that isn't meant for them. That part is done, and you don't need to worry about it." "That's not what I was asking," he said. "I know," I said. "You were asking if you still have a father." He nodded, and for a moment he looked very young. "You have a father," I said. "You're going to have a father until I'm in the ground, and after that you'll have what I've built, and I hope when that day comes you'll understand why I built it the way I did, quietly, without announcing it. Because a man's worth is not in what he has. It's in whether he shows up." I picked up my fork again. Outside, in the dark, the cardinal came back to the empty feeder and perched there for a moment, as if it hadn't gotten the message yet that there was nothing there for it. Then it flew away into the November dark, and I watched the spot where it had been, and I finished my dinner. I left the next morning. My son stood in the driveway, and we shook hands, and then he pulled me into a hug that lasted longer than the hugs he'd given me in recent years. I got in the truck. The engine knocked its familiar knock. I backed out of the driveway and I drove past the gas lanterns and the circular drive and the professionally trimmed hedges that would cost more to maintain in a year than I had spent on my first car. I had 11 hours ahead of me. My knee ached. The sky was the color of unbleached cotton, and there was a weather report on the radio that was saying something about sleet north of Memphis. I turned down the volume and drove. Here is the thing I want to leave you with. If you've stayed with me this long, I have never once met a person who set out to become the kind of son or daughter who arranges their parents' diminishment for money. It doesn't happen that way. It happens slowly. It happens through small choices and small surrenders, and through listening to the wrong voice at the wrong time, one reasonable-sounding sentence after another, until you're sitting in a kitchen making plans that the version of you at 22 would not recognize. I am not here to tell you that my son is a bad man. I am here to tell you that he made bad choices, and that he had the chance to choose differently, and that he took that chance. That matters. I intend to hold on to that. What I know, rolling west on 40 with 11 hours of road ahead, is that my life is my own. My affairs are in order. The things I built are protected in the way I want them protected. And somewhere back in that house on the quiet street in Nashville, my son is washing dishes in a kitchen that his wife is no longer in, thinking about who he wants to be. I hope he figures it out. I really do. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to choose between protecting yourself and protecting a relationship? I'd like to know what you decided. I read every word you leave me, every single one. And if this story meant something to you, if you've ever been the one in the driveway watching someone drive away and wondering whether you did enough, hit that like button and subscribe. There are more stories where this one came from. Some harder than this one, some that end better. I'll be here. Drive safe out there. And for what it's worth, show up for the people who matter. Even when it's 11 hours. Even when the engine knocks.